Hello and welcome to Eternal Durdles. I'm your host, Zach Clark, and with me as always, Phil Blackman. Phil, how's it going, man?
Bro, it's going great. You ready to shred some ledges?
Yeah, dude. Ledger Shredder is a card that we're going to be talking about today. We should say that Eternal Durdles, your only weekly video podcast on YouTube for Legacy. Pretty impressive, guys. The only weekly one.
We're the only weekly one, and I'm gonna manifest this out into the the actual ether vials here.
Right off the top of the deck, it's a 2/2 now.
Right off the top of the deck, I'm going to manifest here that calling Ledger Shredder right before it picked up, before everybody else was like, "Oh wow, this card's actually pretty solid." We got that one, and so I'm going to say that.
More importantly, I got that one.
Now you got that.
I never get him right. Phil, you occasionally get him right. I never get him right.
Never get him right. I just want to point out that I feel as though this should forgive me for my miss on Dreadhorde Arcanist.
You know what? Ultimately, you're right about Dreadhorde Arcanist. You were just right in the wrong direction.
Yeah, I was so
that card is now unplayable.
Right.
That card's now unplayable.
Sure. It is unplayable. So turns out. Yeah, it's like it doesn't even show up in Modern. It doesn't show up in the areas where you can even play it.
Yep. I wanna real quick before we really get into Ledger Shredder, just show everybody something rad. We got our Playmats in.
Get those mats.
Oh, cool,
my gosh.
Look at that.
So sick.
Look at that. Sick. We got our Playmats. So you can go to ink.com, inkgaming.com or whatever. I'll put a link below. I'm sorry. I didn't have all that together.
The link is in the description. It is great. The Playmats are sweet. Get those play mats.
Yeah, man.
You need a mat to play on. It might as well be on the Eternal Durdles one.
Yeah. Just don't put it around coffee. It'll stain.
It will stain. It is a beautiful, clean play mat. Let's not stain it up.
Yeah.
Unless you want to. Yeah, hey, man. Hey, you do what you want with your play mats.
I went for the classic stitched sides because I think that those are nice and they tend to keep longer.
I think for the next one we'll have we'll design it so there's a corner that has like the coffee ring stain where your cup goes.
Yeah,
and just be like, just put it here. It's got a designated
the coffee
spot
right there. Yep.
Yeah.
And while I'm at it, you can drink it in your Eternal Durdles mug. We're at Spaceballs level merchandising at this point for the podcast.
It is excellent. I will say I'm as you can see, I'm crushing a gigantic iced coffee, but if I were crushing hot coffee, it would be in that very, very handsome mug.
Yeah, we need to get tumblers. I think that's the next thing is get tumblers.
Dude, I need like a 128 ounce iced coffee tumbler.
Yeah, for
the amount that I consume. All right, so we talk about this bird advisor?
Yeah, we need to be talking about Ledger Shredder, that's for sure. Let's talk about Ledger Shredder and say what it does real fast. Ledger Shredder is a 1 and a blue mana for a 1/3 bird advisor. It's got flying and it says whenever a player casts their second spell each turn, Ledger Shredder connives. Super simple design there.
Super simple. Reminder, connive means that you draw a card, then discard a card, and if it's a non-land card that you discarded, you put a +1/+1 counter on the creature that connived. So I remember when we were first talking about the spoilers, we weren't so high on really anything outside of the hearse, and then I was thinking more about Ledger Shredder, and I was like, no, I really like the idea that similar to how you can go Dragon Rage Channeler plus Bauble and get a Surveil trigger, here you can go Ledger Shredder plus Bauble and get a connive trigger. So now you have a 2/4 that's out of bolt range that just has filtered your hand and set up a bunch of different things for graveyard shenanigans and whatnot. And I was like, I feel like this is pretty powerful because it will see itself. And that seems like a play pattern that is already what the top deck wants to be doing. And this can do a whole bunch of other things. And the fact that it doesn't interact, or rather the fact that it does not rely on the graveyard to be powerful, it just relies on you doing the thing that you already want to be doing anyway. And so the longer I thought about it, the more high I was on it. We mentioned that last cast, and it seems as though the rest of the community has also finally gotten to that point where they're recognizing the power level of this
Julian Nab tweeted just the other day. I was like, you're on the right path when Julian Nab, Legacy God is on your side, right?
Mm-hmm. So this card right now, it strikes me as on the fringes until we see either a Murktide Band or something like that. If they touch Blue Red Delver again, it seems like this card is the
It's poised.
Like,
yeah, it's poised.
It is on the bench. It is waiting to step onto the court. But I think the thing that is interesting about it is the fact that it just doesn't rely on the graveyard. So having a threat that doesn't rely on the graveyard between Murktide and DRC is really powerful. Like that just ups the stock for a threat, at least in the best deck. This can also have homes in a bunch of other things. I was thinking to myself, is there a home? I remember a long time ago, a guy named Doug, who I used to play with up in Syracuse, and still goes and plays at events every once in a while. I mean, I haven't seen him since before the pandemic, but I would always see him at the major events on the East Coast, or the Northeast at least. And I remember he played a long time ago a 16 land, no wasteland, Arc-like Phoenix deck that was just blue-red. It wasn't playing any Dark Rituals or Buried Alive or anything like that. It was just 4 Terramander when Terramander first came out, 4 Delver, 4 Arc-light, a bunch of good cantrips. He was playing Charter Course at that point to like help set it up. And he went like X2 in, I guess it was an SCG or something like that. It was a major event. He had a really good result. And he was playing 16 lands, and he was playing like 6 basics or something, like 5 islands and a mountain. And it was just like super clean, exactly what like the deck that just wants to continue churning through its deck wants to be doing. And it would just convert free flyers and crush people that were trying to play like Lightning Bolt. And it reminded me of going back to potentially doing like a classic blue-red Arc-light Phoenix deck where you just move away from Murktide Regent, which may be just meaning you're playing a worse version of Blue-Red Delver, but you can move away from Murktide, lean harder on just getting a little bit more aggro, because now you have a one mana threat at DRC, a 2-mana threat at Ledger Shredder. You can spend the rest of your deck churning through your deck, and Ledger Shredder is going to allow you to convert a bunch of your Arc-lights into free, essentially, Delvers.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, my thing is, it's like, it's not only good like in that sort of shell, but like it's one of those cards that's also an enabler, you know. Like, I don't think that necessarily like Reanimator is going to need this card to like make a thing happen, but just like you were saying, where like it's taking cards that you don't want in your hand and putting them into the graveyard for later use. You know, a Reanimator style deck that's maybe more tempo oriented or something doesn't exist right now, but we could see a time when those things start to happen, and that's only if they ban Grizzlebrand. They've got to get rid of Grizzlebrand to make that deck do anything aside from just play Grizzlebrand.
Well, I was thinking about what Ledger Shredder could potentially do to open up different varieties of archetypes that we've seen. Mm-hmm. Because one thing that Ledger Shredder does, like as you said, it's an enabler. The thing is that it can get very big. Yeah. Because the +1/+1 counters. The thing about this is it's a little it's not obvious, but there isn't a mana gate on the card. So yeah, you need to cast 2 spells, but the fact that it gets the +1/+1 counters whenever it connives, and there's no mana gate on that, meaning that it can theoretically happen both on your every time on your turn and on your opponent's turn, because your opponent casting 2 spells also will put a +1/+1 counter on it. So in a way that it's similar to like how Esper Sentinel might tax your opponent into not wanting to cast a spell unless they have the additional mana to pay for it. This one, if they are trying to protect a planeswalker or something like that and can't afford to 2-spell because they don't want you to put a +1/+1 counter to make your threat bigger and filter your hand, is also a big deal. Your opponent now has to think about like what it would mean if you just tack on additional +1/+1 counters and continue to filter your hand. I mean, so far in the time that I've played with Ledger Shredder, I've been very impressed with it, and I feel like we're just sort of scratching the surface so far because it's only been out for so long. But the idea that you could move into something like, you know, a blue-black, maybe splash a color, unearth style deck, because this is a good threat with that. Baleful is a good threat with that. Enabling the graveyard interactions off of the connive. I feel like there's just a lot more going on that meets the eye with this card. And the longer I think about it, the more and more I'm interested in trying to play it in a variety of different things, not just, you know, your blue-red aggro decks. I mean, I was thinking Phoenix at first, but I've been thinking about potentially using this as I've been wanting a solid 2-drop in Miracles for a while. And I get that this card doesn't strike itself as something that you'd play in control. But one thing that's really nice is I'm leaning very hard. I mean, personally, I'm playing a Miracles build that's playing a lot of Mystic Sanctuary. And rather than having to rely on Brainstorms to like put Miracles back, being able to filter them to the graveyard so I can Mystic Sanctuary for additional targets with counterbalance, that's an interesting space that I want to explore. I don't know if it's actually going to work, but it's just an idea of how a card like this that it presents itself as a beater, so it's a threat, and also can set up shenanigans beyond just putting Reanimator targets in the graveyard or Delve fodder into the graveyard. It can also do things like
block Delver. It can block Delver, Phil. You know,
it blocks Delver when it comes in. Yeah,
in your deck. You know,
if you sequence while they don't have red mana up against a blue-red Delver opponent holding up a bolt, you just go this plus another spell and it's out of bolt range. Like that is really relevant. Like the stats on this being a 2/4 after the first connive, and which also means that it's looted for you, is really powerful. The other idea that because it's a flyer, it's also going to be really good against all like nice flicker wisp.
Yeah,
I got a 2/4.
Yeah, you know, 2/4 that becomes a 3/5. You know, like it gets out of like toughness kill range very fast. I think something that's kind of crazy about this card is you know, you look at like how good it is in decks that don't need to deal with the graveyard, but it also is funding Delve. You know, like let's say that they don't get rid of Murktide Regent, and you end up playing this instead of some other card in your Delver deck. It funds Murktide Regent, Gurmag Angler in Death Shadow. You know, so if it's one of those things that like gets better with time as more of one thing comes out. This card stock increases as well.
Mm-hmm. I think the another aspect of this card that's sort of under the radar, and we're getting closer to it. Between this and Baleful Strix, there are a lot of now playable birds, and I don't know if Bird Tribal, if there's a payoff in there somewhere for Bird Tribal.
Theoria the Falconeer. Put that up right here.
It is something that I'm like thinking about. I'm like going back and looking through Scryfall. I'm like, are there any bird payoffs? Because once I have 8 birds in my deck, I'm legitimately thinking like, can I pay off this tribe in a way that I've never considered before? But also I'm thinking to myself, if I'm playing like, does Bird Tribal, is there some unplayable bird that is like undercosted? I don't know. There are so many things about this card that I'm interested in exploring. But also particularly the flavor text. Have you read the flavor text yet?
I will read it right now. See, I have 2 versions of this card. I have the full art one, but I also made sure that
he's already spec'd. Zach has already spec'd. I bought my set. Zach is spec'd.
So before I go on to that, I think we should call our last episode "Convert Your Currency into Currency Converters."
Oh yeah, look at all those currency converters that Zach's spec'd on. Dude, so let me just say, I bought my right after we talked about Ledger Shredder last episode.
Yeah.
Or was it last episode? Something like that, where I was like, I think this card is a little bit slept on. I'm a little bit higher on it the more I think about it. I bought my set of Ledger Shredders for like, I don't know, $4. I got the extended versions or whatever. I got a set for like $4. Looking at them right now, already doubled. They're at $9. Yep. It's going up. People are recognizing that this card's good.
This card says for the flavor text, no evidence, no crime.
Dude, no evidence, no crime is in the realm of greatness at any cost. Yeah,
that's right up there with
it's really good.
Dummy up, you know.
Yeah. So the other, I also think that like this card is going, like if you play any kind of legacy deck that could consider Ledger Shredder, I would say pick up your set. It's just good to have in your collection, particularly because I play a lot of Pioneer. I've also tried this in Explorer in Arena. This card is great there, where Phoenix is actually a good deck.
Yeah.
This is just a house in those decks. So this is going to see play in the younger formats. It's just like a staple card. So before like big events start pulling back up and people are actually looking to buy into this card steeply to play with it, highly recommend just getting in before it goes up and is like, you know, a $15 rare or whatever.
Yeah. So aside from that, what are some other great things you can do with this card? Like it's obviously going to be a great beater if it sees play, because it's just like getting in that way.
I'm convinced that it'll see play, by the way. Like,
yeah.
After playing it myself, I'm not thinking if it will see play. I'm more curious now the extent at which it will see play.
Yeah, I feel this is a card also that like is another candidate for 4-ofs, because if you don't need it, it connives and you can just get rid of it. You know, like. That's the mark of like a really great spec too for like financial things, is like when you know you can play 4 of them in a deck and playing one means actually that like it's actually better in multiples, but it's on top of that just amazing if you have it in your hand. It's good at like any field of the game. So that to me like is a mark of a really great spec for a candidate for like what we'll see play and what's actually good, and like, you know, of course what will go up in value. Not that we're like a magic finance podcast. This is not, this is not financial advice. But to an extent, isn't every Magic the Gathering podcast about Magic finance? Like, you want to get in early so that so that you can save your money for other things in life. Your tournament result, your tournament entries, whatnot, getting dual lands, that sort of stuff. So, a penny saved is a penny earned, I think, in this scenario. So if you can get in early, get your ledger shredders before they're like $7-8, like.
So I'm thinking to myself that Ledger Shredder is like, I don't know if you've had an opportunity to cast Ledger Shredder yet, but Ledger Shredder is also excellent in multiples on the table.
In draft, I've cast it in draft on Arena, yeah.
So I've played it in Constructed so far, and when you have multiples on the table, like, you just start churning through your deck really fast. Yeah. Particularly when you're playing cards that beget other cards, i.e., cantrips of any kind. What actually becomes interesting is you get to choose, if you have 2 Ledger Shredders on the table, you actually get to choose how to stack the connive. So if you're thinking what you want to discard and also thinking what sizes you want each Ledger Shredder to be, you can choose how to stack your connive triggers so that you draw and have the most information for whichever one of them you're looking to grow, if you want to discard a land and which one you want to remain the same. So in that regard, it's like if you're playing around any type of damage-based removal, or if you're looking to like one to go after a planeswalker and one to go after the opponent, how to size them properly. There's more game too with managing multiples on the table, beyond the fact that, like, if you don't have time to deploy a second one, you can just filter it away and turn it into a +1/+1 counter. So this is good in multiples, not just like having a 4 in your deck, and that can be dangerous if you never want to draw multiples. This is actually something you want to draw multiples of, because they can clock very quickly. And then once you have multiples on the table and you are churning really fast, because now you're not going to have any dead cards in your hand. You're going to often get to the point where you're thinking, what resource do I actually need to line up here? Because I'm going to be giving up things that I want, because you know what I mean?
I think that one of the things that is really interesting about this is how like, what's the word I'm looking for? How interesting connive is. Like, it's sort of a sleeper mechanic, because when you read connive, you're like, yeah, draw and discard a card, and if I don't discard land, +1/+1. So that actually seems negative. You're like, like, I have to discard a non-land card for this to even have any value. And honestly, what it comes down to is you're going to be hitting your land drops more often. But beyond that, you're churning through your deck. The +1/+1 part is gravy. Like, you don't need to always make these grow. Like,
so I think the +1/+1 is or getting the counters and having it occur on both you and your opponent whenever a second spell is cast each turn. Now, just quick caveat: it's when the second spell is cast each turn. So if you were to cast something, then cast Ledger Shredder, and then cast another spell, it will not trigger. That's your third spell. So you have to think, when your second spell each turn matters, you have to think about that with Ledger Shredder in your deck. Now, the other thing to remember too is when you're playing online, the triggers will happen for you. It's easy peasy. In paper, you have to be conscious that when your opponent casts their second spell, that they get a trigger. Yeah, because this is a card where paying attention to how many spells your opponents cast for things that aren't Storm is not frequent. It doesn't happen very often. Players will miss a lot of triggers like this when they were first adapted to DRC, right? Where people didn't remember to always surveil after every single non-creature spell. This is the same thing. Like, people will have to get adjusted to it. But if you start seeing this in paper, there's going to be a lot of missed triggers. Don't be one of those people. Always, when you have this in place, stay hyper-focused on making sure that every time it happens, because the difference between looting and not looting can be the difference between winning and losing a game, right? Drawing an additional card is insane. Right, exactly. Well, but I think the +1/+1 counter is the reason why this card's actually good. Like, the filter by itself, if it's just
a 1/3 that just filters is not that good. Obviously.
It's not it. Yeah. At 2 mana, it's not good. If this were like some stats flyer for 1 mana that looted, it would be an all-star. At 2 mana, it would be unplayable. But the +1/+1 counters throughout the game means that as this thing goes unchecked, particularly against certain kinds of removal, it's just going to be like a 4/6, a 5/7 flyer, like deep in the game. Like, if this comes down early, this could theoretically check your opponent's Murktides. If you're if you're going really deep on it and they don't have a way to remove it. Like, granted, this gets hit by Pyroblast and whatnot, like blah, blah, blah. But the idea that it's also each turn. So on your turn, you can cast 2 spells. Your opponent can cast 2 spells, but you can do that on their turn as well. It's not every turn cycle; it's every turn. So if you get like a counter war on your opponent's turn, you can churn, you can connive the same way that you can on your own turn.
Just to like kind of drive this point home slightly more. Let's say it's your turn 2. You play Ledger Shredder. You followed up with Bobble, right? And
loop. You loop before the bobble trigger resolves.
Yeah,
before bobble resolves.
Great. And then your opponent goes, I'm going to cast Brainstorm at the end of your turn, and you're like, I'll daze it. And they daze back. Then you loot, right? Okay, now you've got, let's say you've dropped a non-land each time, right? You've got a 3/5. Then it's your opponent's turn. Your opponent casts 2 spells, and maybe you cast a spell too. Let's say it's not turn 2. Let's say you're both able to cast 2 spells over the course of 2 turns. That's +4 in 1 turn cycle. It's wild.
And you've looted 4 times.
Yeah, and you've looted 4. That's an insane amount of advantage. And even if you get rid of 2 land cards and 2 non-land cards, like 3/5's 1, nothing to scoff at, and 2, you've just churned through a lot of your deck and sculpted your hand to be much better and to take advantage of this card on later turns, which is wild.
And we're only talking about this so far in the context of like a very narrow subset of decks. Like this could, I mean, the same way that this fuels Delve, it also fuels Escape. Like you can play this second spell, dump an Uro on turn, and then on turn 3, play this, play something else, dump an Uro on turn 4, escape Uro. Because this will have helped you get there. There's a lot of aspects where this card can come into play because graveyards abusing the graveyard is where Legacy is at the moment for a lot of decks, both fair and unfair. And the fact that this is also lets you sidestep, one of the things that this will also do, particularly because so many Pyroblasts are seeing play, is that this will help overload Pyroblast. So I find a lot of the times when I'm playing against Blue-Red Delver, players don't board out, when I'm playing Miracles, by the way, when I'm playing Miracles and I have Source to Plowshares and I'm boarding into Pyroblast and I have all this this 1-for-1 removal for Murktide, I find that a lot of players don't board out their Murktides because they're kind of priced into having to keep it for threat density.
Yeah.
The thing is, though, is that against a deck like mine that is looking to just to trade a bunch of resources and survive, for that type of deck, it's just a giant Tarmogoyf, right? Like I don't want to get hit by it. But in my mind, it's just a Tarmogoyf. It's not netting any advantage. I'm like more scared of the cards that generate advantage, like a DRC filtering the draw, or like post-board Narsets, or like Court of Cunnings or something, right? Like the things that put you a brawl cards are the things that I care about. But the thing is that being able to line up, like against Blue-Red Delver in particular, it's like, okay, I can line up my Prismatic Endings against Delver or DRCs. I'm going to line up my Swords against opposing Murktides, and then I'll use my Pyroblast for opposing Delvers and Murktides. Whereas this card entering the blueprint, if you will, is going to overload those cards. And I know that we have had those types of conversations before where it's like you can either sidestep how your opponent's board or you can overload how they board. And this card, I think, is going to do really, really good work in overloading those things because it can become another fat flyer. They're going to be priced into using the removal on it. And if you're playing against an opponent who's playing bolts and this gets out of bolt range, they're going to be priced into having to either toss it with it. Yeah. They're going to have to either toss it with it in the air with their own stuff, which means that you may not be deploying things at like the most opportune time. So it's pressuring your opponent in one way, or it's just going to overload their Pyroblast, in which case that's awesome for you, right? Because now they aren't prepared because they don't have the density to deal with your threat base. And like everything about this card on paper, more and more in the environment that we currently exist in, it just seems like it is primed for a breakout moment. And even more so, if there are any bans in the near future, this card is just going to be like first in line to make a big push.
Yeah, and I think the next big event is in July, right? Yeah, we've got something coming up in.
Yeah, the SEG Con just happened. I know that Legacy Pit registration is going to be happening soon for the Legacy Pit 2. But just in general, as more like paper events start picking back up, or like more high-end paper events at least. I mean, this card, I feel as though the more we talk about it, like this card's already just going to be a Legacy mainstay. And I'm just curious as to how many different places it can actually show up in, because I want to try it out in fair control-ish decks. We've been talking about it in tempo decks. There's the possibility to use it in like value style mid-range decks. And then, of course, like, who knows if this is like a sidestep for combo? You know, I mean, the pivoting to the creature plant plus board, and this is another way that's just like, if there was a blue-black reanimator shell, I know that red-black has been the thing, but it's like, maybe there is a home the same way that like Doomsday has tempo Doomsday and plays a little bit more of a fair game in addition to having the combo kill. You could do something like that where you're like, yeah, I'm playing bird tribal that also can reanimate Grizzlebrand.
Yeah, I mean, and this thing carries a Jitte just as good as anything else, right? So like you can look at Stoneblade decks, you know, that's going to work out well there. If you get to a point where you're like, this card does also kind of want to get to the late game. So like you're going to have the 5 mana to equip your Batter Skull onto this thing, you know, as time goes by. So I think that one of the interesting things about this card is it lends itself well to every point in the game. Like if you drop this on turn 2, it's fine, right? But if you drop it on turn 3 through turn like 6, it's going to be, you're going to end up coming back with probably at least a 4/6 on your side of the board. And then when you get into the late game with like a 4/6 on the board, like it's just gonna get bigger and bigger and bigger, and your opponent is going to not be able to deal with this even when they cast something like Murktide, right? Like if you have a creature that is a 7/9 and your opponent has a Grizzlebrand on their side of the board, if they manage to reanimate Grizzlebrand through everything, probably impossible because you've been looting through your deck. This is going to block and kill Grizzlebrand.
I mean, the other thing that is really important to note about all of the different sizing aspects that it could potentially reach in a game is that it only cost you 2 mana. The other things that you were doing, you were going to pay the mana and play those spells anyway. Like the fact that this card just gets big without asking anything of you outside of potentially some sequencing is where like the power level is. There's no mana gate, right? All of this stuff is free. You're playing these spells anyway. You're playing Expressive Iteration to 2 spell anyway. You're cantripping into cantripping to 2 spell anyway. You're going to kill removal spell plus cantrip to regardless of what was on the board otherwise. Like this card just is netting power for free on top of everything else that you want to be doing, which is where the power level really is, right? It's not asking anything of you. You are already doing this stuff. So the fact that
that's where the best cards come from. Like look at Curse Scroll. Curse Scroll is a perfect example of play magic, get rewarded, right? Like that was one of the very first, like you can just spit out cards like you would normally and get rewarded for playing this 1 mana artifact that does 2 damage to somebody once you've run out of cards. And this is a very similar situation. It's just asking you to play Magic and you're getting rewarded for it.
The other thing that's really interesting about this card compared to a lot of other cards that care about casting spells that usually see play in these like Xerox style builds is this one doesn't care what kind of spell it is. So if you play this plus a 2nd threat, you get to connive.
Yeah,
you know, it's like it doesn't. Most often the stuff that cares,
right? Yeah,
right. Like between DRC and like Monastery Mentor, Young Pyromancer, like they care about the spells being non-creatures. Ledger Shredder don't give a shit. It's like you got all these creatures. Load the board up. I'm gonna connive.
He's like Delver Secrets. I see you. Let's go.
Yeah, let's go. Loot that.
Yeah.
So like, I think that Ledger Shredder is going to. Yeah, I think between Ledger Shredder and the Hearse being the 2 cards that are actually going to make it in Legacy out of Capenna, like the Hearse has already shown up in Legacy decks, so clearly that card is playable and is solid enough to continue seeing play. But I think like Ledger Shredder will eventually become, when we look back at Streets of New Capenna, as the card that
the breakout
card the actual like star of the show for New Capenna is Ledger Shredder, which I'm happy about because he wears a dapper suit. Very clearly got good aesthetics here.
Look how good he looks.
So good. Yeah.
What a good bird.
And the extended art is really nice because the wings just cross the frame. So like I think we've said our piece on Ledger Shredder. I mean, I am for sure going to be trying out a couple of different builds to explore what is possible with it, particularly when I play at my locals and stuff. I really want to explore the power level of being able to do all these things. You want to know one of the things as I was thinking about like what decks could this bring back, and then I'm thinking like, oh yeah, I remember loving like Dak Faden pitching Zombie Master and Squee and just getting like that kind of value, right?
Okay.
You just moving those cards back up. It's just like that stuff's too cute now, but it does make me think like Zach I know that you're a fan. I know that you've played it many a time a long time ago.
Okay.
Are you ready for the return of Blue-Green Madness, my guy?
Oh yeah, hell yeah, of course, man.
I think we found your savior here.
I think inside of that deck also you've got cards like Life from the Loam that like dredges, like you're going to be able to feed your graveyard with stuff like that too. Like I think there's a lot of potential for random draws a card and discards a card, especially when you're like, okay, well, like maybe I want to just feed my graveyard and Golgari Grave Trolls in there, right? Okay, so I'll draw a card, I'll dredge. Oh, looks like Golgari Grave Trolls in my hand. Oh, I guess I'll just discard this Golgari Grave Troll, you know, and get the +1/+1 counter, put him right back where I want him. You know, I'm not saying play this in dredge, but I'm saying like those strategies just work so well together that like there's got to be something there. I love Life from the Loam in my Rug Delver deck to just like really grip down on decks that are being greedy about their mana. And you know, a deck that is obviously not necessarily being greedy about its mana, but is being greedy about its non-basics is the deck that just won the SEG event. You know, the eight it's not 8 mulch, that just a lands deck, right?
The same deck that won. So the 2 SCG 5Ks was won by green-white decks.
Yeah. So yeah, but they were lands decks. They were Merit Lage decks, right?
Yeah, they were Merit Lage decks. Yeah.
So like, you know, just being able to have like, you know, an infinite number of wastelands, you know, is good. And Ledger Shredder gets you to the cards you want. Life from the Loam, you know, gets things going. I'm just saying it's adding a lot of selection for that style of strategy. I don't think that Rug Delver is coming back just yet, but give it time.
I think that the one thing that Ledger Shredder could open up to that I want to explore is the possibility for a mono blue deck, like a mono blue style tempo deck, or a deck that doesn't need to be on red, the same way that blue-red Delver is.
Yeah.
The fact that between this and Murktide, I feel like you have a pretty potent threat base now just in blue, and there's the possibility that you could move into other colors. Like maybe blue-black, like blue-black tempo competing with blue-red is also something that's possible. You would need a reason to want to move into black, but I feel like this opens the door because now this is going to give threat density beyond the red creatures. For a long time, it was like DRC and Ragavan were the red creatures you were priced into playing red. Whereas now the only real draws are, of course, DRC, Bolt, and Pyroblast. And then the other sideboard cards that you have in red are more or less interchangeable. Like, and the festivities minus dealing a damage is like, okay, there's a ton of options like that in black. So I wonder if there's other color pairings that you can pair with blue now that you have an additional threat here. So you could, even if you wanted to play Delver still, you could be on Delver, Ledger Shredder, and Murktide into another color and open up a lot of space there. So I'm curious to try mono blue. The other thing that I want to try with this card is there a place for this in an 8-cast build? Because all of the free baubles being able to loot, I know that they moved away from the Echo of Eons build for a while, but this is also another way that you can convert that card to the graveyard while still getting a massive advantage.
Yeah.
And when you reload, that's just giving you more spells to make an even fatter flyer. Yep. And I mean, right now it seems like they might be a little bit threat dense between Emery, Sai, and Kappa Cannoneer on top of Thought Monitor. But it's just another one of those things, again, where the fact that it doesn't care what kind of spell, so it can be artifacts, it can be creatures, whatever you want, it means that this can slot in potentially in a lot more spaces than immediately come to mind. Like, it seems like the only place that you would want to put it is like, yeah, this, Delver, Bolt, whatever, common, you know, basic, simple. But this could show up in anywhere that happens to have blue and any kind of spell. So, I mean, I'm repeating myself now, but like,
yeah, I mean, it turns out Esper guy is good all over the place, right? Yeah, because he's part of the Obscura tribe, which is.
I'll say one more thing too, is that particularly against a deck like Jeskai Days Undoing with all the walkers, it's really tough if you're playing a non-1 mana threat in Legacy right now that doesn't pass the Teferi bounce test. This card is still good, even if they bounce it. Because if they bounce it and you redeploy it plus another spell, you're back to a 2/4 that looted you again. So even though it doesn't technically have an ETB ability, it kind of does if you can back it with a second spell, because it will see itself when it comes down. So if you play this plus another spell, you'll always get to connive, so it'll be a 2 mana 2/4. that will check a lot of decks. And if they are looking like, so in that sequence, like let's say you have this, you've looted already or whatever, they play a Teferi, unfortunately it sticks and they bounce it. On your turn, you can replay this, play another spell, connive, and now it's a 2/4 facing down their Teferi, which will uptick to be at 2 loyalty, which means that you will have, even if you can't connive again, exactly what you need to take it down if they don't have the capacity to remove it when they untap. So the fact that it will put them under that kind of pressure and it lines up against that threat, which is a potent threat in the format, it shows that like this is good against Delver and DRC because it can become a 2/4 fast. It lines up really well against getting bounced by a Teferi if you can redeploy and set it up to kill that Teferi on the following turn. It potentially has the stats to get larger over the course of a game by the time a Murktide comes down, if you can pace it well enough. It just seems to line up well against everything. And the same reason that it can, if it can grow and get as big to tussle with a Murktide, if you can get this up to a 5/7, which means that you would have, both players would have had to at least connive it 4 times. It can also stand in the way of an Uro, which I get that these are extraneous circumstances, like both players are churning through their decks at this point, and the likelihood that something's going to stay on the table is unlikely. But in those, like just thinking about how it lines up against everything in the format, it's positive. It lines up against everything really well. At least on paper, it lines up against everything really well, and in practice, it has proven itself. So
I think
really, really high on LEDGER.
Another interesting thing is the idea of like this being a combat trick, you know? So like,
yeah, that doesn't come up often, but you're right.
Yeah. So like your opponent has an active Dragon's Rage Chandler. This guy's a 2/4 and you have open mana. Does your opponent has to attack in? They don't have a choice because Dragon Rage Chandler must attack, right? And your opponent attacks and you're like, I'll brainstorm and I'll daze the brainstorm and pay for the daze or whatever. And boom, you've pumped your guy and blocked the Dragon's Rage Chandler, killed it. You know, you've basically like netted a card too because you're able to kill his guy that like had to attack into your guy.
It's similar. It's similar to it's like when DRC's in combat. It's similar if you can get Delirium at instant speed.
Yeah,
and pump your DRC. It's similar. It's very similar in that vein. Yeah, you can catch somebody. But
you this one's catch people with draft tricks, man. Draft tricks in Legacy are so underrated because it's a skill set that so many Legacy players do not cultivate at all. Like no one's ready. That's why, in fact, is such a interesting deck to play because nobody's ready for a random sequence of spells that like screw up the combat stack. No one's doing that anymore. You know, like occasionally someone will blink a guy with their Flicker Wisp or something like that. But like for the most part, nobody's playing around combat tricks in Legacy. You're just you know that instants in the hand are for drawing cards, maybe drawing more, maybe seeing different cards in your hand, maybe doing some direct damage and counter spells. But you generally don't see something like, oh, I'm going to pump my guy, you know, in mid combat. So, and also if like your opponent really screws up, they try and counter your spell after they've already cast a spell, and whoops, they've given you a +1/+1 counter while you're blocking their guy. There's just so much play there. I really like the idea that like you can just screw people with as far as combat tricks are concerned.
Yeah, I'll wrap us up on this last notion here. I think this card is going to make players realize how reliant on 2-spelling players are throughout a game.
Yeah.
As like a lot of things just naturally 2-spell, from Expressive Iteration to Snapcaster Mage to any of the Planeswalkers that draw a card and then want to cast another spell, like Narset finding a card, casting a spell, Teferi bouncing something, wanting to cast a spell. There are just a lot of
you're just looking for, you're like brainstorming for a Force of Will.
Brainstorming for something. All of the artifact decks are based on essentially affinitying themselves out onto the table, and this comes down fairly early. Like there are so many decks that are just based on frequently at least 2-spelling once they're at the capacity to do so, that this is going to trigger a lot more frequently than meets the eye, and it will just be another staple player. Like this is exactly the kind of spell like creature entering Legacy that's going to be healthy. It's not doing anything absurdly busted, right? It's just it's like a solid rate. It's asking you to do things you already want to be doing. it's the power and toughness ratio is exactly where it needs to be in order for it to fill the roles that it needs to fill in the format. I think this is an absolute slam dunk. I'm excited to try it for in Arclight Phoenix.
I mean, we've said everything that can be said about Ledger Shredder. You should pick yours up immediately.
Yes, please pick yours up before they spike anymore.
And while you're at it, you should probably go to MoxField.com and build a deck based on Ledger Shredder and share it with us in the comments, or just tell us what you thought. Like, I mean, do you have a secret card from this set? Like something, you know, like I feel like this was a sleeper card that we picked up on early, but there's got to be this set seems like it's a bit underpowered, but there's got to be some sleepers in there. So I'd like to hear from people about what they think the right card is to pick up from this set.
I also think that it in particular too, beyond like the other cards that you have, if you've tested out anything with New Cabana, particularly if there's any lists with Ledger Shredder that you're trying, I'm genuinely like have in my notes before I share them to MoxField, a ton of different Ledger Shredder lists that span all of the colors. Like it is extremely versatile in what lists, at least on paper, it seems like it could fit into, because there are so many decks that either want to be able to loot or pitch cards to the graveyard or abuse the graveyard in some way or set themselves up, or just need an additional threat, and this is opening them up. So like, if you've been thinking throughout the cast, maybe it could work in this home and we haven't talked about it, throw it down in the comments, because there's the potential that we might try it. Like I might build it. I might play it on 90s MTG or something. Like I'm very interested in exploring this card. Like this one has my creative juices flowing.
Yeah. But before we go, I wanted to make sure that you guys know that this podcast is sponsored by MoxField.com. It's a great deck building website. You can go to MoxField.com and you can create an account for free. Never costs anything. It works on your PC. It works on your Mac. It works on your phone. You don't need an app. It's a great place to share commander decks. It's a great place to share legacy decks. MoxField.com. Check it out. Finally, I would also like to thank our Patreon supporters, giving us great ideas lately for content ideas. So thank you once again, everybody. You can join us at patreon.com/EternalDurdles. And if you get a chance, if you think, hey, you know what? It's the work day. I'm not really doing a whole lot. Let's talk to Zach and Phil. We're on Discord. Get into our Discord. The link is
in there.
Get onto our Discord. BS with us. You know, that's all. That's all I got for you today. Phil, take it away.
Hello and welcome. My name is Phil Blackman, and with me, as always, is This Is Better Than This. So I really want you to make another This Is Better Than This segment.
I'm working on it. Yeah. Anyhow,
if you guys haven't seen Zach's Death Shadow, this banger, absolutely check that one out.
Everyone's talking about it.
I'm gonna link it. It's showing up right now. Go click on that link.
Yeah. All right. Everyone have a good day. We'll catch you next week.
This is better.
Hey, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Check out this other video, and if you can, please support us on patreon.com.